Hi there. My name's Dr. Teresa Ashford, and I am a lecturer in social science. I actually teach geography and sustainability, and I teach into the sociology courses as well. And I'm really pleased to give you a really short, snappy, I've tried to make it as quick as I can, little overview on digital ethics. And this is a research area of mine that I'm really interested in, and hopefully I am going to give you a little snippet of what I hope will inspire you to look further into this idea of digital ethics and social media. So let's begin. And I'm kind of setting this up to be a little provocative here, digital ethics, and I have this idea of how can you even know that? And hopefully at the end of this little short video that you'll probably come to the understanding of, yeah, you could probably come closer to understanding the complications of digital ethics because it is multifaceted, I'll tell you straight up. But it's super important and it's worth your time, and especially if you're interested in pursuing careers using social media, digital ethics, I think, should always be with you in everything that you do. Now, I'll be using a couple of resources, and in particular, a lot of the research that I do is in something called actor network theory, and I am a big fan of Aristotle and Nicomachean ethics and virtue ethics. So that will be touched on in the presentation today. I also think Pohman's book on discovering right and wrong, that I'll actually give you the reference to at the end, is really such a great text. He gives a really super overview of ethics, the different approaches in ethics, and it's, I think, one of the better introductions to the field that's available, so I strongly recommend that. I've just come across the work of Sheldon Simola, and that's 2017, and she's done a lot of work looking at academic integrity and behavioral ethics, and I've taken some of her work and added it in here. And finally, Rest, who is kind of 1979, the dawn, well, I can't say the dawn, the beginning of behavioral ethics, but I will talk about his model today. So let's get to it. So I don't know if anybody will remember what that sound is, but that was hooking up to a modem. And a lot has changed in the world in terms of what a digital life looks like. And I think today the whole idea of digital life is a bit of a truism. It's our life. The digital is probably an unnecessary adjective. As I actually think all of our lives are impacted by the digital. And there's some very rare spaces in our day-to-day activities that are not impacted by digital technologies. Digital cues or messages or media, entertainment, eating, how we order to eat, socializing, all of these kind of basic and core systems to do with our communication are now almost entirely mediated and translated through technology. So the proposition that I'm offering in the short video is that there's a value of seeking out some pre-digital wisdom and combining that with some contemporary configurations of behavioral ethics, which is really the study of what we do. So the key question is, what's the role of ethics in social media, and how does it work online in what I'm calling this kind of hyper-social but also disembodied ways that we're finding? So just to be proper in terms of learning outcomes, this is what I'm hoping that you're going to get out of this 10-minute snippet, that you're going to have some insights into the construct and applications of ethics in social media. And later, and I know this is just a very short one, but hopefully you'll have an understanding of the importance of the philosophical approach to ethics in examining digital worlds and our digital selves. So I just used that piece of music as a transition, and I know I'm moving quickly here, but I wanted to read you these two quotes. I wanted to have you think about the only real failure in life is not to be true to the best one knows. That's from Buddhist writings. And then the second one is a Socratic quote, and it talks about our need to transcend instinct and desire through the capacity to reflect on choices that shape human behavior. So this is what basically I'm all about, is how do we do and how do we perform this reflection? So we know ethics is about living the good life. And it takes time and energy and will and patience. And the philosophy of ethics is a complex field that ultimately focuses on studying how we ought to live, behave, and act. And it helps us define and think about what is right and what is wrong. The first stage of ethical consideration is moral awareness and the ability to distinguish and reflect on choices. The question is, how can we distinguish right from wrong? Think about it. How do you know an action is wrong? What do you take into consideration? How do you reflect on your choices? So I'm going to propose here that we look at some ethical frameworks first, and then we'll look at the idea of transcending instinct and desire. So basically, I think it's really important when we're thinking about ethics, and we know it's about our behavior, it's what is considerable in this behavior. So basically, I've kind of designed this triad here that I hope encompasses the most general approach to ethics. So please don't think this is the only way to do it. I think this is just maybe a useful configuration. So basically, what is considerable? How do we make a judgment on what is ethical or not? And there's generally 3 domains that are considerable in our reflection of ethical and moral actions. First, we judge what actions are moral. So we look at the action itself. Secondly, we judge on what the effects of the action are as moral. So that's kind of a very popular way of looking at things. And lastly, it's how we judge the actor herself. What are her motivations? What were her rationales? What was the purpose of the action? So in a very broad sense, those are the 3 dimensions of how we can actually judge and look at ethical behavior. Now, these dimensions have names, and they're probably names that you will have recognized as ethical theories. The first one that we know is this idea of deontological. And so that's a duty-based action. We've all heard of consequentialism, so that's an ethical framework that looks at the effects of actions, and then we have virtue-based. So if I just quickly roll through these and invite you to do more research later, let's just look at the highlights. So for deontological, where the purpose of this framework is to focus on the action itself. And it has something called a categorical imperative, which goes something like this: act only according to the maxim by which you can, at the same time, will it to be a universal law. And I could go on about this because I actually think it's quite a productive way to look at how we make rules. And basically, we make a rule that we think can be applied to anyone at any time. You don't have to go too far with this idea to know and to understand that there's probably some troublesome points in this, but we can also recognize a lot of us are familiar with this way of thinking because it's kind of the golden rule. Do unto others as you'd have others do unto you. The key aspect here that I do want to highlight is that people are always treated as an ends to themselves, never merely as a means to an end. Now that focus is entirely different when we move on to the consequentialist perspectives, that they are only interested, so the actions themselves are not really too worrisome for them. They don't really spend a lot of time wondering if that's the right action. They're entirely concerned with what are the results of the action. So you can do unlawful or unkind things if the end result ends up to be a good outcome for people. Also, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, so Vulcans very often call on this utilitarian kind of view of things where they say the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. So basically, you could reconcile the idea of killing one person if you knew it would save two or more, anything more, because it's a simple calculus going on here. So that's utilitarian. So looking at the effects. I'm going to keep this rolling. And the very last one we have here is what I think has a lot of legs in social media, and I invite you to explore this more deeply, is this virtue-based, actor-based approach of judging action. And so the actor in this approach, it has a concern of the role of motives and passions in a good choice. So they don't just do good things because it's duty and they know it's the right thing to do, like a robot, but they actually do it because they've developed these characteristics of care and virtue in their processing of a decision or a choice. The other interesting thing I've just put here is Nussbaum, Martha Nussbaum, who's fantastic. Aristotelian or virtue ethics is not just concerned with one moment where you do something virtuous. It's actually a commitment for a lifetime where you advance and explore virtue. And you actually never reach being virtuous until the very, very end, because it takes a lot of practice and a lot of wisdom. But that's the actor-based evaluation there. Okay, so is that it? Is that all we need to do, just to study ethics? And then basically, yoo-hoo, the world will be good again? Well, it's actually not so easy, which I'm sad to tell you. It takes a little bit more than just studying ethics. And so that's where my interest in behavioral ethics is really coming to the fore. And I'd like to introduce Rest's model. So basically, what we've just done here is we looked at the kind of philosophical, quick overview of some ethical frameworks. But what is most important, according to Rest, is that we actually have some moral awareness of the ethical issue that we are considering. So very often we can go shopping, go driving, text somebody very quickly, but we actually are not fully aware of the ethical implications of what we do. So first off, Rest says we cannot behave morally and ethically unless we first have a sense of what is a moral, what are the moral implications of this issue or question or practice. So after we've got the moral awareness down, we then need to know, well, what are our options? What is the decision making? What would that type of awareness and that type of framework, for instance, ends and means calculus, help us to make a decision? After that, so that's kind of more of a knowledge base. So that's kind of, you could call on that philosophical research that you've done. But then after that, you personally need to have a moral intention. You need to want to do the right thing. And then at the very end of this long line of, really, it seems like a lot of research and pressure and thought that goes into this, then our moral action comes up. Whew, I was almost exhausted telling you about it. So, is that all we need to know? Well, apparently not. I'm just giving you some more things to think about. So, my interest in actor network theory and technologies are this. Okay, we've got some philosophy. I'm just going to quickly review. So we've got some philosophy, so we know what ethics is. We've got some cues on behavioral ethics and how to behave ethically. Well, that's all fine. But now we have to do this thinking through a technical mess. And this is what actor network theory helps us to understand. So it knows that the digital environment that we're working through, this idea of technologies and us, changes how we know. We move into this position of almost a shared responsibility. How do we work with technology that impacts our actions? So our actions are not done alone. We are not working autonomously anymore. We have things nudging and pushing and directing us. What about the moral agency of some of these artifacts? Sometimes our choices are already pre-made, so it's that mediation and active shaping. So I know we've kind of talked about social shaping. And lastly, social shaping of technology. So basically, and in social media, you're probably most familiar with this, is basically how things are presented. The font, the color, the feel of it changes how we view things. All of these things, technology impacts how we do. And this whole idea of acting through, by us, for us, to us, is pretty interesting when we think about. So goodness gracious, hold the phone. So are we the actual problem here? But maybe that's not the case. I've just been arguing that technology can actually obfuscate, make more difficult or less obvious our moral actions. But I have one more thing that I have to share with you, and it's a little depressing, that we actually, even without technology, have some issues about how we make decisions. And it's back to behavioral ethics again. It's this idea of dual processing. So I just really want to quickly highlight this for you, and this is this research coming out of Sheldine Simola. So that's in 2017. So basically what she has done after an extensive review of behavioral ethics research, she has found 20 different things, but I've actually just highlighting 4 for you, is that individuals are poor at predicting how dishonest they will be or how they'll feel about their dishonesty. Well, that's a bit of a shock to us. Next, most individuals engage in some degree of dishonest behavior, yet they're motivated to maintain a positive self-concept. So basically, we can do kind of smallish, unethical things, but we still like to think of ourselves as overwhelmingly ethical. So that's kind of very interesting, and I'm going to put a little direct you towards fundamental attribution error, which is pretty interesting, and it relates to this. Next, emotional, physical, and social cues can influence dishonesty. So there's a bit of emotion going on in here in how we act. And this last one, depletion of self-control, is associated with dishonesty. And this is both a mediated and moderated effect. And this idea of depletion of self-control, and depletion is when we have been extremely tired, extremely stressed. When we're in these states, these kind of physical, emotional states, that can actually impact our dishonesty. So, what are you going to get out of this? I'd like you to leave with this idea of dual processing. I'd like you to recognize that much of our behavior is not controlled through logical, knowledgeable, and reflective behavior. Often our actions are based on unconscious, emotional, and instinctual responses. And I just have to share this with you because I think it's great. Aristotle calls this type of emotional behavior, or being a slave to our whims, as incontinence. And yes, this is thinking incontinence, but very important. Okay, I'm going to try to wrap it up here. Here we go. So basically, what is this mess of information that I've given you, and where are we now? Where does this leave digital ethics and social media? Well, I have 4 points for you. I think we need to know and understand different ways to judge and inform action. So that's basically getting to, we need to be more familiar with philosophy and ethics. We need to understand action-based philosophies, effects-based philosophies, and looking at virtue, character in the action. I think more time spent on that is not wasted. I think we need to understand that we're basically pretty bad at knowing what we do. So we need to prepare ourselves to be good. And that's where I think really thinking about REST's moral awareness to action continuum, I think could be helpful there. I think we also need to understand that we don't always use logic, knowledge, and rational thinking to make decisions. So we need to recognize the idea of dual processing. And lastly, and this is kind of the area that my research is in, we need to understand that technology changes how we see the world. We need to be more critically and thoughtfully engaged with the technologies that we're using, and thinking about this idea of technical mediation. And I think that's about all I can do for you here, but let's see if I can come back. Nope, my video is not working, but that's okay. I have a couple of tips that I'd like to leave with you now. There is a great website called Ethics Unwrapped, and I am going to just show you that right here. It's fantastic. It's actually out of a business school, which you may think, well, I don't know about that, but just think about it. They need to know how to be in the world. And basically, they have all of these behavioral ethics concepts in really short, beautiful, probably much more well-presented little snippets than this one. And the ones that I would like you, that I'm actually recommending, are the Bounded Ethicality. I think that one really works when we're thinking about technology and what we think we can and cannot do. Fundamental Attribution Error, which we've all fallen victim to, and I think once again with mediated environments that really comes to the fore. And then of course ethical fading, so that idea of if we're kind of distanced from the ethical issue, just like how technology can do, that we become less connected with our ethical behaviors and maybe allow ourselves to maybe behave less ethically. Let's see if the great big one will work here. And no, it doesn't. Anyway, I hope that was interesting, and I wish you the best for your course in social media.